Welcome to the Quantum Business Book Club. We will finish this year looking at some of the Western world's favorite fantasy fiction novels, because these authors and these creators and these visionaries saw what was possible. I call it quantum business because every page I open bends time. I can sit across the table from genius like Huxley, Tolkien, and Le Guin. I can trade notes with minds who built entire realities during collapse. And now you are invited to join me. Each of these books reshaped how I lead, create, and play the long game. For me, reading isn't consumption. It's also not distraction. It helps me play the game to win. In fact, these books allow me to be the game designer. So this season is our Fantasy and Magic series, The Myth Makers of Revolution. Every time the world industrializes, someone rediscovers magic. I'm Nicole VZ, and this is your field manual for founders and CEOs, creative visionaries, artists, leaders, and those of you willing to build something amidst the destruction. This is the next age of business in the wreckage of the last. Each week, we will pull a thread from writers who faced war, tyranny, and mechanization and turned them into myth. They built the map to hope. From Soviet satire to celestial wonder, we decode the leadership patterns that kept humanity awake inside the darkness. This isn't nostalgia. This is navigation. Welcome.
My gut says this episode's going to get the least amount of views. And for all of you just listening, firstly, thank you. For those of you watching, apologies. But I underestimated, as per usual, the effort that this particular series would take. So I'm currently in my sweatpants and sweatshirt regalia. Most of me thought that by creating a consistent appearance on these podcasts, it would make my life easier. I would say it's been a negligible efficiency marker. Thanks, those gentlemen who have inspired us by wearing the same outfit every day. I figured if Andrew Huberman could do it, I could do it too. But to be honest, it saves zero time and energy. So there's that. I won't get into the idiosyncratic nature of my life in this moment, because that's not what these podcasts are about. The Quantum Business Book Club is a sacred series, especially in my fantasy saves the world era. So this episode is a book I read as a kid. You probably didn't, because you probably didn't hang out at the library as a child. Only some of us are that special, shall we say. But every book in this series begins in a different kind of collapse. Huxley saw a world sedated by abundance. Orwell saw a world imprisoned by fear. Bulgakov saw a world corrupted by bureaucracy. Saint-Exupéry saw a world losing its humanity to machines. And soon, Tolkien will show us a world swallowed by domination. Ursula K. Le Guin saw something underneath all of it. And that's why this had to make the cut. I've done some last minute chopping and changing, which has also added to the workload. I'm apparently really good at working hard in chaos, so here we are. But this collapse and this particular book happens long before nations rise or fall. This book helps us understand the collapse inside the individual. Before the rise of fascism, there is always a fracture inside a person. Before tyranny becomes a system, it begins as a wound. Before power corrupts the world, it corrupts the one who wields it. So Le Guin is not writing about overthrowing tyrants. She is writing about preventing them. A Wizard of Earthsea is not the story of how evil is defeated. It is the story of how evil is created and how a human being becomes whole enough to not replicate it. I do think that this will be an incredibly useful blueprint, just like the rest of these books. Obviously, I am biased. But when we start to say, well, how can I make a difference? How can I possibly build in this world that is being actively destroyed? How can I stay hopeful when all I'm experiencing is challenge? this will be the blueprint. This will be the map for your own internal journey. When we talk about fantasy saving the world, Earthsea is the blueprint that reveals how it actually happens, not through conquest or armies or magic or miracles, but through integration, through taking that learned, lived experience and integrating it. It might be the quietest, most subversive, anti-totalitarian text of the 20th century. Not because it rails against the state, but because it dismantles the psychology that makes the state dangerous in the first place. So Le Guin wrote this book a little later than most of the other authors we've talked about. She grew up in a country traumatized by World War II, electrified by nuclear power, and seduced by American exceptionalism. The world around her worshipped mastery, efficiency, control, the boy genius, the victorious nation. She saw the shadow under every headline, the same shadow the 20th century kept reenacting. Men raised to conquer who had never been taught to feel. So while Europe wrote about totalitarian regimes, Le Guin wrote about totalitarian psyches. While Orwell mapped the ministry of truth, she mapped the ministry of ego. While Huxley warned us about the conditioning from birth, she warned us about the conditioning that comes from praise. We're starting to see the through line here, right? While Saint-Exupéry reminded us to see with the heart, she reminded us to face what the heart hides. And while Bulgakov showed the corruption of institutions, she showed the corruption of ambition. And then our last author, Tolkien, he builds this fellowship of hope. Le Guin shows the internal fellowship required to lead it. Earthsea is the missing step between all of these novels and authors. This book explains how a human being becomes capable of wielding power without becoming a danger to others. So, because authoritarianism starts as psychological imbalance long before it becomes government, and because control begins in the ego long before it becomes policy, we know power corrupts the person long before it corrupts culture. So Earthsea asks the question the other books imply but never name. How do you prevent the next tyrant before they become powerful enough to destroy the world? And Le Guin answers, you teach him to face himself. So this is why we are here, to decode the internal mechanics of power, to understand why some people build empires and others build healing, and to map the inner revolution required for the outer one to succeed. This is where the fantasy becomes the medicine beyond the map. So let's talk a little bit about Earthsea, that book you probably never read. So Jed is the protagonist, and he is a prodigy, a gifted, impatient, brilliant boy raised on the island of Gaunt. He discovers he has real magic, the kind that bends wind, summons fog, speaks to the deep grammar of the world. Sound familiar, Airbenders? Okay. He is taken under the wing of Wizard Ogian. It's so interesting, like with all of these fantasy novels, because when you read them, especially as a child, you have your own pronunciation, and then like HBO has an opinion on it, and then the character morphs into that visual. Anywho, we'll call him Ogian since that's what I call them. So Jed is taken under the wing of the Wizard Ogian, who is a master of patience, humility, and silence. Jed hates it. He wants speed, skill, praise, notoriety. He wants to prove himself, like all young Padawans, right? So he travels to Roke, Earthsea's school of magic, where talent is celebrated and ego quietly inflates. There, in a moment of rivalry and bravado, he attempts a spell far beyond his maturity. He tears a hole between worlds. He unleashes a shadow that tries to kill him. The rest of the book is not about fighting a villain. It is about repairing the damage he caused. He flees the shadow. He hides. He tries to outsmart it, outrun it, deny it. The shadow grows. His final breakthrough is the opposite of every fantasy cliche. He stops running. He turns and faces it. He names it. And when he does, the shadow is revealed as himself. His fear, his pride, his hunger, his unintegrated power. Only by naming it, claiming it, and becoming whole does he and the terror he has unleashed become defeated. Earthsea is not about defeating a villain or darkness. It is about integrating it. This is not the hero's journey. This is a prevention manual. Brave New World taught us how states use pleasure to control. 1984 taught us how states use fear to suppress truth. The Little Prince taught us how wonder repairs the heart. Master and Margarita taught us how corruption reveals cowardice. Earthsea teaches the internal physics of it all. Where does tyranny come from? From the unexamined self. Where does corruption start? Inside people who have power, but no wholeness. Where does collapse begin? In leaders who can channel force and fear, but cannot face themselves. This book is not about overthrowing a regime. It is about becoming someone who could never build one. So the machine of Earthsea is not institutional. It's not even really external. It's psychological. It is the belief that talent equals maturity, that skills equal readiness, that brilliance equals wisdom, that mastery equals entitlement. Every totalitarian system has been built by someone who believed these lies. Le Guin's genius is that she places this machine inside a boy with enormous potential. She shows how quickly gifted children become dangerous adults when the world gives them validation instead of grounding. Jed's early life mirrors every cautionary tale in our series. Like the alphas in Brave New World, he is conditioned to believe his exceptionalism means destiny. Like Winston Smith in 1984, he is trained to think naming equals power. Like the master in Bulgakov's Master Margarita, his brilliance makes him vulnerable to despair and pride. And like the businessmen and kings in The Little Prince, he confuses mastery with meaning. Each mistake he makes mirrors an entire century of political collapse. Earthsea is a world held together by equilibrium. Every act of magic has a cost. Every word has a weight. Every action has a consequence. That is the opposite of industrial civilization. In the mid-20th century and the age of, when Le Guin was growing up in like the 1950s, so classic boomer, right? Born a child of parents who had gone through one, potentially two great wars. Her world worshipped mastery without consequence, bombs without foresight, production without ecology, power without humility. She grew up in the shadow of World War II, the nuclear age, Hiroshima, American exceptionalism, the American dream, and then Cold War masculinity. She watched boys be raised to conquer. She watched power rewarded before wisdom. And she watched nations pursue influence, magic, without balance, and then call it progress. So Earthsea was her answer, her fantasy that could save the world. So that being said, magic in Earthsea is not a metaphor for fantasy. It is a metaphor for influence, leadership, talent, and intelligence. Jed's mistake is the same mistake as every empire builder, using power to prove instead of power to serve. That's the machine. And that's also the fracture. That is the source of every authoritarian collapse in the last 100 years. Talent without maturity, courage without discernment, ambition without shadow integration. If you don't know, at me. So every book in the series has an antagonist. The conditioning machine, the surveillance state, the bureaucracy of corruption, the worldliness that kills wonder, the dark lords of power. Earthsea's antagonist is different because it's internal. It is ourself. The shadow is not a demon. It's not a monster. It's not evil. It is our unconscious self. The part of you refuse to acknowledge, the unclaimed wound that eventually harms others. This is the machine behind every war, every dictatorship, and every collapse. Leaders who have not faced their shadows shape societies that cannot survive theirs. As per usual, in this particular series, if you're not drawing the parallels between now and this fantastical novel, let me spell it out for you. We live in a time where talent scales instantly. Influence inflates overnight. Visibility outruns wisdom. Ambition accelerates much faster, 10x, if you will, faster than self-awareness. This is Earthsea's world. A magical society out of balance. A generation of gifted individuals raised to perform, not integrate. A culture that rewards mastery instead of maturity. In a world where the greatest danger is not the enemy outside, it is the shadow inside. Le Guin is not teaching spellcraft. She is teaching leadership. She is teaching sovereignty. She is teaching the internal prerequisites of power that heals rather than harms. This is why Earthsea belongs in the same breath as Orwell, Huxley, Bulgakov, Saint-Exupéry, and Tolkien. They diagnose the systems. Le Guin diagnosed the self. Thanks, lady. Why am I not surprised? And without her diagnosis, there is no revolution worth building. So Earthsea is one of the few fantasy worlds where magic doesn't work unless the magician is aligned. And that alone is rebellious. In our world, power works even when people are fragmented, fractured. There are other words to describe them. Authority works even when the leaders are unconscious. Influence works even when the person behind the influence is clearly bullshitting. But in Earthsea, the universe refuses to cooperate with fractured people. Magic demands wholeness. Magic needs integration in order to work. So in Earthsea, magic is not manipulation. It is balance. Every act has a cost. Every alteration shifts something else. Every naming carries consequence. And I mean, we have seen this theme in other sort of magical, fantastical worlds. But in Earthsea, it's not about spellcraft. Le Guin is proposing a moral physics, a world where power is accountable by design, which feels like karma, right? But in comparison to the books in this particular series, Huxley showed us what happens when society removes consequence. Orwell shows what happens when a society removes truth. Saint-Exupéry shows what happens when a society removes wonder. Bulgakov showed us a society that removes courage. Le Guin didn't remove anything. She brings us back into wholeness. She restores everything. Because Earthsea is an ecological universe. Your actions echo whether you intend them to or not. Your talent can bend reality whether you understand it or not. Your shadow shapes the world whether you admit it or not. So the lesson is pretty simple. You can't bypass yourself. The central mechanic of Earthsea's magic is naming. True names hold true power. But Le Guin makes one distinction. that changes everything. Naming isn't labeling. Naming is knowing. Knowing is becoming. Because you cannot name a thing if you do not understand it. And you cannot understand it unless you are in relationship with it. And so magic is relationship made visible. That is the inverse of totalitarian power. The inverse of every modern leadership mistake. Because it is the inverse of control. Control objectifies. Naming requires intimacy. Knowing requires understanding. Totalitarian systems strip people of their individuality, of their names. Earthsea teaches us how to restore them. More fantasy treats the shadow as an enemy to destroy. The Guin treats it like a teacher. The shadow is everything Jed refused to integrate. His insecurity, his hunger, his wound, his need. When Jed runs from the shadow, it grows. When he attacks the shadow, it strengthens. When he hides from it, it hunts him. This isn't metaphor. It's psychology. It's leadership. This is every founder who has outgrown their own emotional capacity and watched their company wobble under the weight of their unclaimed inner life. Earthsea tells you the truth, and neuroscience now confirms the only way out is through. You cannot kill your shadow. You can only integrate it. There is a moment in Earthsea that changes the entire trajectory of the book. When Jed is done running, he turns, he becomes the hunter, and he chases the shadow. This is the mythic inversion, the initiation. This is the internal revolution every leader, creator, and visionary must undergo. Turn toward the thing that terrifies you. Turn toward the part of yourself you are ashamed of. Turn toward the fear behind your ambition. Turn toward the wound behind your gift. Because the moment you stop running, your shadow loses power. So at the end, Jed names the shadow, and the name is his own. I know you saw that one coming. Look, this is a young adult children's book, okay? Perhaps one might argue they all are. And I don't think that was lost on the authors. Like, I think you want to get someone at that space, but I digress. The entire point of Earthsea being wholeness is not achieved by adding. It is achieved by accepting. Integration isn't a technique. It is a recognition. You were never fighting a monster. You were fighting the part of yourself you didn't want to claim. This is the inner liberation that makes outer liberation possible. This is the internal power that cannot become tyranny. This is the magic that can't corrupt, which means the only safe leader is the whole one. So Earthsea is the completion of this mythic arc we've been talking about in all of these books. Brave New World shows what happened when pleasure replaces autonomy. I've been repeating myself to kind of bring us to this point. 1984 shows us what happens when fear replaces truth. Little Prince, when wonder repairs perception. Master and Margarita, how humor exposes corruption. And Earthsea now shows us the internal transformation required to wield power safely. So this is the turning point between collapse and renewal. The moment when the revolution cannot be televised. The moment where power becomes consciousness and not conquest. This is what saves us from becoming the tyrant, you and me. So what if the shadow isn't symbolic? It's science. Le Guin wrote about the shadow before, well, I was going to say Western psychology. I mean, you all know my obsession with Jung. So there was verbiage around this. There's actually, especially in terms of indigenous wisdom, and understanding for this. But she pulls all of these elements: Taoism, Hinduism, shamanism, elemental, like sort of ancient wisdom, like into this book. And some might say that's sort of a spiritual smorgasbord, and there's probably some appropriation going on there. I wouldn't disagree, but it felt like this truly magical integration for myself when reading it. Jung touched, like, I would say Jung was what brought shadow into the language of Western psychology. Neuroscience is now 100% on board. And I mean, we've got internal family systems and parts therapy to allow us to integrate all of these parts of ourselves so that we are no longer hijacked by our unconscious. Studies from the National Institute of Mental Health show that unprocessed fear increases impulsivity, risk-taking, and reactive aggression. Does that sound tyrannical to you? 2020 study in Nature Human Behavior found that people suppressing shame or insecurity project more dominance, more defensiveness, and more control-based behaviors. This is Jed. This is every tyrant. This is every founder meltdown. This is every leader wielding power instead of integrating themselves. The science is clear. If you do not face your shadow, it leads. If you do not name it, it acts. If you do not claim it, it becomes the machine that breaks you. Le Guin just made a fantasy novel about it. In Earthsea, magic works through true names. You cannot change something until you understand it. You cannot understand it until you are in relationship with it. Translation. Think about it like kinship, epistemology, and anthropology. Or in systems theory, this is Daniel Forrester's pattern recognition before intervention. In ecology, this is reciprocity before resource extraction. In indigenous wisdom, this is relational knowledge. A 2018 MIT Sloan Systems research report states that intervention without immersion produces fragile solutions. And this is what Le Guin's writing about using wizards and Guins. Jed names the hawk because he understands the hawk. He does not overpower the natural world. He collaborates with it. That alone, that makes this anti-industrial fantasy, which again, why she made the cut. So I might have been Frenching that one in there, but I think it plays. I'd love to know your thoughts. Earthsea's magic obeys a law Western leadership still ignores. Everything is connected. Systems theory in terms of management is starting to bleed in around the edges, but it's much more intellectual than in practice, right? Nothing is free. Balance isn't a metaphor. It's physics. Le Guin built magic the way complexity theorists, system theorists, describe ecosystems: interdependent, nonlinear, self-correcting, feedback-driven, sensitive to imbalance. This mirrors the work of Ilya Prigogine, the Nobel Prize winner from 1977, who proved that systems thrive in dynamic equilibrium, not stability, not a static state. This is why shadow destabilizes Earthsea. Jed's imbalance becomes the world's imbalance. Le Guin is showing us what ecology and systems theory teach. Violations of balance ripple outward. The ecosystem always keeps the receipts. So Jed as this like leadership archetype, and for the most of the book, the wrong kind of leadership. We have seen leaders and the poor example of leaderships in each of these books, right? I mean, especially if I am presenting This entire series is how to save the world and overthrow tyranny and fascists. Brave New World highlights leaders who sedate. 1984 talks about leaders who surveil. Little Prince are leaders who forget to feel. They forget their why. Master and Margarita is leaders who capitulate. And then we're going to talk about leaders who isolate. But Earthsea gives us the most dangerous kind of leader. The gifted one who is not yet whole, the exception to the rule, who refuses to play by the rules. Exactly. Leadership studies back this up. In 2019, Harvard Business Review analyzed 42,000 leaders and found unintegrated high performers create the most organizational damage. Not mediocre, not the incompetent, the brilliant ones who refuse to do the inner work. And this is exactly what Le Guin is writing about. Every tyrant begins as someone who cannot tolerate their own fear. Psychologists call this affect intolerance. Le Guin calls it shadow. Political science calls it strongman archetype. Le Guin calls it naming what you fear. Behavioral economists call it externalized insecurity. Le Guin calls it running from yourself. Earthsea is practically a case study in authoritarian psychology. What happens when you have unintegrated fear, overcompensation, defensive dominance, wounded ego, distorted self-perception, impulse to prove, and premature power? Modern authoritarian studies, Adorno, Altmaier, and Stenner, echo Earthsea's premise. People who cannot regulate their internal world try to regulate the external one. Whew. The moment Jed stops running and begins hunting the shadow is the psychological hinge that all transformation rests on. In trauma studies, this is called agency restoration, an existential philosophy turning toward. In cognitive behavioral science, exposure integration. And in spiritual traditions, this is the return. Every discipline agrees on the same thing. Avoidance feeds the monster. Facing dissolves it. Le Guin mapped the healing process long before therapy made it mainstream. Earthsea ends with something profound. Power that is integrated becomes safe. Jed does not gain control. He gains coherence. And that word is everything. Coherence, I'm proposing, is the gold standard of leadership science today. Coherent nervous systems lead calmly. Coherent identities make ethical decisions. Coherent minds do not fracture under power. Coherent cultures outperform high control ones by up to 40%. Le Guin was not writing about magic. She was writing about coherence. And as much as I want it to be, the story's lesson isn't mystical or even magical. It's operational. It starts with what breaks, moves you into how to repair, and then maps it out, creates the SOP. Power is safe only when the person holding it is whole. Everything else is corruption waiting for conditions. This is why Earthsea belongs in this series. The other books diagnose the external world, but Le Guin writes about the internal operating system. So she gives us the operating manual. Every visionary, every creative, every leader, every trailblazer, problem solver, rebel, rule breaker, you and me, knows, like, with great power comes great responsibility. We have to know ourselves or we will do harm. We have to integrate our shadow or it will drive us. When we understand our power, if we don't understand our power, it will escape us. If we don't name our fears, it will name us. Balance isn't ethics, it's physics. This is the code behind every revolution that actually lasts. This is the architecture of power that cannot rot. So, as you can feel, we're getting there. We're getting there. Earthsea doesn't give us a prophecy, it gives us a practice. So the 3 tactical takeaways of every episode. Choose the slow path before the bright one. The first mistake that Jed makes is the one gifted people always make. He rejects the slow path. He trades presence for performance. He wants the spell that dazzles, not the discipline that steadies. This is where the danger starts. Devotion isn't worship, and we've talked about this in every single one of these books, okay? Spoiler alert. I'm going to be repeating myself for the rest of this episode. Devotion isn't worship. Devotion is the willingness to stay with what is difficult long enough for it to become wisdom. Ojayan he tries to teach Jed this. Silence, stillness, observation. Magic comes from listening before acting, from knowing before naming. Once a day, focus on one question from your work or life and refuse to jump to the clever answer. Don't try to answer it at all. Don't put this in your calendar. Don't problem solve. This isn't a productivity to be measured, like a productivity metric. Just sit with this and see what happens. I do this most mornings. This is kind of what my meditation practice has been looking like because, you sit there for however long, 45 minutes, an hour-ish. And all of the, someone asked me this yesterday, if I can turn my brain off. Do I feel like a lot, sir? Yeah, 100%. And then it turns back on and then I turn it off and then it turns back on and then I turn it off. And it's okay to just let all of the noise ramp up and then you turn the volume down and then it turns back up and then you turn the volume down. Do nothing. That's what Ojayan was teaching. This is what potentially all of us who want to know everything kind of refuse to integrate. There's I don't know how to say this more or less eloquently for fear of repeating myself for the millionth, 100th time. If you already knew the answer, we wouldn't be having this conversation. It is in the uncertainty that the next big thing emerges, that the disruptive technology is discovered, that the patent, the solution, the offer is made. This is how you strengthen the muscle that stops you from tearing holes in the world to prove something. Devotion is the first key because without it, power has no center. It becomes performance. Power becomes shadow food. So just accept or sit with that desire to accept. I don't know. So yeah, first one, just don't know for 15 minutes, okay? Second, name what you fear before it names you. The shadow in Earthsea is not a monster. It is a mirror. Every insecurity Jed refuses to face takes shape outside of him. Every fear he denies because something that stalks him. Truth in this world is literal. Naming is power because naming is recognition. Recognition is integration, and integration dissolves fear. This is where a lot of us can break. We stay vague, we stay armored, we go to defense mode, and then it becomes binary, and we're just playing not to lose. Nobody wins. Ask yourself, what am I avoiding? What am I pretending not to feel? What am I afraid people will see? What secret belief about myself is running this season of my life? And again, don't fix it. Don't explain it. Don't dress it up in therapy language or management theory. Just name it. Shame, failure, inadequacy, insecurity, age, stupidity, ineptitude, whatever it is. Oh, just me. This is how Jed disarms the shadow, not by force, but by truth, by recognition. Because shadows do not vanish when you overpower them. They dissolve when you face them. Truth is the second tactical takeaway because it is the only antidote to self-deception. And every authoritarian system begins with self-deception. Okay, 3. Turn toward what terrifies you and take back your power. Jed becomes free the moment he stops running. He stops fleeing the shadow. He stops strategizing around it. He stops managing perception. He stops performing resilience. He turns. And that turning is the most important movement in the entire book. It is the hinge between fragmentation and wholeness. Reclamation is not a mindset. It is a pursuit, a directional change in your entire system. Like I always say, balance is a verb. So turn around. Identify one place in your life where you are running, the conversation you don't want to have, the boundary you refuse to set, the truth you keep postponing, a habit you rationalize or justify, a fear you keep outsourcing to someone else, and look at it. Send the message, state the truth, cancel the meeting, book the meeting, ask for what you need, demand truth, cut the tie. Reclamation isn't overcoming, it is ownership. This is what breaks the cycle of creating external shadows. This is what prevents you from building the systems you are trying to escape. This is what Le Guin means when she says, nothing you run from becomes smaller. Whew. So, okay. Devotion keeps your ego from sprinting ahead of your maturity. Truth keeps your shadow from leaking into your power. And reclamation keeps your fear from becoming your leadership style. This is conscious power. This is 21st century power. Power that doesn't require performance. Power that doesn't metabolize insecurity into control. Power that doesn't build empires as compensation. It is power that doesn't corrupt. So yeah, Earthsea isn't about spells. It's about accountability, alignment, awareness, equilibrium, balance, interconnectedness, conscious power. It is the first fantasy in this series that frames power as an outcome of self-integration rather than a given. And this is why Jed becomes safe, not because he grows stronger, but because he becomes whole. We live in a world where power scales faster than identity, where visibility outruns emotional grounding, where talent outpaces self-awareness, and where ambition accelerates without brakes. We live in Earthsea, a world out of balance, a world full of gifted people whose shadows now spill into everything they build. So these practices are the antidote, the recalibration, the inner revolution behind the outer one. You cannot build a liberated world with unliberated people. You cannot dismantle the machine with leaders who have not dismantled themselves. You cannot create systems of coherence while operating from fragmentation. Le Guin wrote the first leadership framework that doesn't collapse under pressure. Devotion steadies you, truth disarms you, and reclamation restores you. These are the only conditions under which power becomes safe. Alrighty, so these are the aha kind of takeaways that I will leave you with. Because we have walked through Earthsea now, not just the geography, but the psychology, the inner landscape where collapse begins and where liberation becomes possible. We've met the machine of unintegrated power. We've seen how the shadow forms. We've watched Jed run, hide, deny, deflect, and finally turn. We've traced the psychology, biology, and leadership science behind it. We've practiced these 3 takeaways, these 3 keys, as we've done in each one of these episodes. So let's bring this full circle, right? Earthsea is this quiet pivot point in the series. Every other book has shown us how systems break people. This one shows us how people break systems. In Earthsea, the machine wasn't the world. It was us. It was the boy. It was his gifts, his praise, his ego, his insecurities, his fear, his unexamined hunger. And that's why this book matters. Because we do not live in a time where external tyrants are the only danger. We live in a time where shadows scale because power spreads faster than we can even hold it. And these unintegrated leaders become the infrastructures that harm. So Le Guin and Earthsea attempt to give us the antidote by showing us how to overthrow the tyranny from within. The answers you're chasing in the world are waiting for you in the quiet you keep avoiding. I've been talking a lot about this week. Like, if you keep looking for external validation, firstly, it is a bottomless pit. There's enough data and opinion and conjecture out there to back up anything. So how are you going to explore yourself? How are you going to defend you to you? There's this wisdom that appears when you stop performing, when you stop proving, when you stop reaching for external validation to stabilize what is ultimately insecure within you, what is shaking inside of you. And that's what Earthsea asks for. That's what Orion was asking for, was this silence, this stillness, this courage to sit with what rises without fixing it and without running from it. Overthrowing external control always begins with the moment you stop outsourcing your clarity. The quiet isn't empty, it is guidance. You overthrow this need for control of the things happening around you by releasing the desire to control yourself. And believe me, my friend, this is just as much for me. What collapses your life is never the thing you fear. It's your refusal to face it. There's always a moment when the structure built around your insecurity begins to crack, and not because you fucked up or because you're weak. It is, in this context, because you avoided the one truth that would have set you free. The rupture isn't the enemy. It is the revelation. It shows you where illusion was holding up the walls. It exposes what you already knew but wouldn't admit. It demands a more honest architecture. Collapse becomes clarity the second you stop resisting it. It's not destruction, it's direction. And then you become free the moment you turn toward the part of yourself you've been running from. Every one of us has had a crossing point. I talk about these last years. And for me, I guess it's the hurricane, but this moment of total humiliation at a time where I didn't think I needed to be humbled anymore. What am I avoiding? There is a moment where the avoidance stops working, where denial becomes too expensive and too explosive, and the shadow grows too loud to ignore. And it's in that moment you can run or you can turn. Turning isn't conquering, it's coherence. It's saying, I will not abandon myself in the place I need myself the most. And that's what that whole experience taught me, was I got my back. I'll get through it, whatever the fuck it is, as undesirable as it may be. What Earthsea gives us is not a hero's journey. It is a prevention manual, a psychic operating system for anyone who wants to hold power without harming others. And this revelation lands in one final truth. Power is only safe when the person holding it is whole, and everything else eventually becomes corrupted. If you do not face yourself, you will reenact your shadow. If you do not name your truth, you will distort your influence. If you do not turn toward what terrifies you, you will build systems that protect your fear instead of your freedom. Earthsea teaches us the inner physics of liberation, the equilibrium beneath every sustainable revolution, the self-knowledge required to lead anything worth keeping. You overthrow tyranny by refusing to replicate its psychology inside of yourself. So here's what I'm going to leave you with. We did it. May you trust the quiet that asks you to listen. May you welcome the collapse that asks you to see. May you turn toward the shadow that asks you to integrate. May you become whole enough to wield power without harm. And may your leadership come from the part of you that is already free. Fantasy doesn't save the world through chosen ones or miracles. It saves the world by reminding us how to face ourselves. Earthsea is the mirror. You are the turning. And the revolution begins when you stop running. Oh, that one makes me want to cry. Thank you. Thanks for being here. I love you.